Whether you operate one forklift or thousands, one location or hundreds, the new My Toyota customer portal can help you optimize your operation and material handling equipment. This one-stop, free-to-use platform is designed to help you take control of your information and make smarter decisions, all at the touch of a button. Register and access your data today at my.toyotaforklift.com. That's my.toyotaforklift.com. Today's safety tip is sponsored by Kinetic, your wearable safety companion.
This is Drew Herpich from NTG. I'm on here on the New Warehouse podcast. My safety tip for the week this week would be looking at really your dynamic routing optimization, right? The big thing that you want to be able to do is make sure that you're helping your drivers and your carriers both really be able to save on a mileage standpoint and regulate the hours that they're working on a daily, weekly basis. That's something that we take very seriously here at NTG, the safety and the requirements of our drivers. So being able to not only look at their route optimization, but looking at their ELDs and making sure that they're staying in those timelines, that's our big safety point for the week.
Thank you to Drew for providing the safety tip and to Kinetic for sponsoring it. You can find out more information about Kinetic and their wearable safety solution on episode 168 or head to wearkinetic.com. That's WearKinetic.com, wearkinetic.com.
Fulfillment demand continues to skyrocket and outpace available labor. To keep up, warehouse operators are turning to flexible fulfillment solutions like 6 River Systems. Utilizing 6 River Systems' award-winning combination of collaborative robots, artificial intelligence, and operational expertise will make your associates and wall-to-wall fulfillment workflow more efficient. No new infrastructure, no change to warehouse layout, easy to deploy and scale, easy to train and retain associates, all at half the cost of traditional automation. Want to take your fulfillment operation to the next level? Go to www.6river.com to learn more. That's www.6river.com to learn more.
The New Warehouse Podcast, hosted by Kevin Lawton, is your source for insights and ideas from the distribution, transportation, and logistics industry. A new episode every Monday morning brings you the latest from industry experts and thought leaders. And now, here's Kevin.
Hey, it's Kevin Lawton with the New Warehouse Podcast, bringing you a new episode today. On today's episode, I will be joined by Drew Herpich. He is the Chief Commercial Officer at NTG, or Nolan Transportation Group. So he's going to come on. He's going to talk to us, tell us about NTG, what it is they do. He's also going to tell us a little bit about his background. He spent a lot of time in transportation. I'm curious to hear about some of the changes that he's seen over the years in the transportation world. And he's also going to talk to us a little bit about the impact of the pandemic on trucking, and also what the landscape kind of looks like coming out of the pandemic as well. So Drew, welcome to the show. How are you?
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me on today, Kevin.
Definitely happy to have you on, and happy to get some perspective from the transportation trucking side. We focus a lot on the warehousing, and it's good to get some of the trucking mix in here as well, because warehousing and trucking, transportation, shipping goes hand in hand. So it's good to have you on. So I'm curious, give me a little bit about your background. You spent a lot of time in the transportation world. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, been seems like a longer 15 years than it has been. But yeah, Drew Herpich, I'm the CCO, the Chief Commercial Officer over at NTG Freight. Been in the industry for a little bit over now 15 years. So I started my career at a company called Coyote Logistics that was bought by UPS. Saw the whole growth of that company. And I came over to NTG to lead our efforts, not only from the enterprise, think about your Fortune 500 customers, but the carrier division, and then our operational service division as well, too. So over the last 15 years, my big focus has been on the carrier side of the equation. I'm really big into, obviously, growing the relationships with the carriers and that side of the business, right? I think a lot of brokerages, early on focus on the customer side, which is obviously very important, right? but really building those relationships and partnerships with our carriers on the long-term front, that's really something that I'm very, very interested in doing on a daily basis.
Okay, very interesting. So I'm curious, over those 15 years, you mentioned, seeing the growth of Coyote and now your time with NTG, what have been some of like the big changes in the transportation world, you think, over the last 15 years that stand out to you?
Yeah, it's funny you say that too. I was actually talking to a buddy about this the other day.
Mm-hmm.
Two things that come to my head right away are just, how things have changed from an automation standpoint and a technology standpoint, right? I remember, talking about those carriers and those relationships. I had a 15-page deck on my desk every day, right? And I'd run over to the fax machine, put each paper in one by one, right? Send it over to the carrier. They send each page back one by one, usually miss a page, using a miss initial, right? And this process going back and forth would take like 45 minutes, right? Now with the click of a button, we're not only sending rate confirmations, but sending carrier packets and getting all that information, whether it be the operating authority or anything like that. So something that would take, back and forth and multiple different tries in time of 45 minutes to an hour, now it takes maybe 30 seconds to get back, right? And so that's one of the big key changes I've seen from just, being able to get set up, get the process going, and how you work with other customers and carriers. I think the other big thing that's really changed the industry, and I think it's really changed, the entire landscape of any industry, is just the cell phone in general, right? I remember joking around with somebody, what could you do really with a phone back in 2007, right? At that time, the iPhone wasn't a big thing. We were still playing Snake on our Nokia phones. Now look, today in 2021, we're able to do everything from the cell phone, whether it be your bank account or get shipments or be able to be on multiple apps. And so this cell phone has really changed how carriers and drivers can really be able to build their business, right? When you talk about those drivers out there, there's 3.5 million drivers, out there on the road today, right? It's the largest occupation in America. And so when you think about that ease of doing business with those drivers, that's what makes it much more easier for us as brokers and even customers as well, too, to be able to work with those carrier partners.
Interesting. Yeah. It's interesting for, I guess, all industries, the impact that digital has had. Like when you mentioned cell phones and you mentioned a fax machine. I mean, maybe some of our younger listeners need an explanation on what a fax machine is, but we don't use those very much anymore, right? So it's very cool to see, that growth even just in, the short time that we've been working. I've been, I guess, in my professional career almost a little shorter than you, but about the same amount of years. So, even to see it in that time period, the changes that have happened technologically is pretty remarkable, where we've kind of come from and gone in just that short period of time. So, I imagine that, as you said, like, with cell phones, it's changed a lot and technology has changed a lot. So, how do you think it's had an impact on the expectations from your customers? Because I imagine that, now that things can happen faster, customers are a little more demanding, and how do you kind of deal with that?
Yeah, I told somebody the other day, we're still kind of in the purgatory stage of all this, right? And so obviously the big impact on technology over any industry has really taken on, right? But you think about the trucking industry, where there was such a push and pull from the old school mentality, right, to the new school mentality, right? And then you start getting, Silicon Valley and people like Google and Amazon involved. Well, there's a little bit of a sexiness that comes to a transportation industry that really never had a lot of that, right? And so I think some of the things that, you see from the customer standpoint of what they expect, it's just like what we expect as consumers, right? You go into this, new era in e-commerce and how shipping packages are coming across. You go to your phone, you put an order in, 12 to 24 hours later, this thing shows up at your doorstep, right? And so you think that same mentality when you think about your freight shipments as well, too, right? And so it's kind of taken over us a little bit more now to that digital aspect, right? Where's that breadcrumb? How do you actually follow that truck? How do you get more information, right? And so some of these things that the customers are starting to demand are coming to fruition with some of the technology that we can provide now, right? And those are some of the things that we're trying to go above and beyond for our customers in this day of age, is to be able to provide them with those readings and that technology. But the biggest thing that I think of that NTG is trying to do is be more proactive, right? Because it's one thing to know about the situation of the problem with or without technology, but what do you do next to help that customer? How do you go above and beyond? Because like in any industry, things do come up, problems do happen. And technology won't be able to fix all of those, right? They may be able to identify it quicker. They may be able to get you to a better solution. But at the end of the day, too, right, in trucking and warehousing or anything in this transportation industry, a lot of different aspects have to go in of how you solve that problem. And I think technology just puts that at the forefront of it.
Definitely, yeah, very interesting points there too, and I like how you said it's still kind of newer as well. As we're expecting, a lot of growth in technology still as well, and there's like a lot of things still to go in terms of Industry 4.0 and all those different types of things. So it'll be interesting to see how that expands. So we've mentioned NTG here a couple times, but we haven't actually explained what NTG is and what kind of services you guys provide. So why don't you give us kind of the overview? What is NTG and what it is that you guys really do?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Appreciate you asking it too. So NTG is a leader in the truckload brokerage industry. We're headquartered down here in Atlanta. We've got 12 additional offices across the U.S. right now. Our main focus is obviously specializing in that kind of strategic truckload shipping, but we have other modes and things that we go into as well, whether it be final mile, different dray moves, different LTL products as well too. Right now in our current carrier base, we've got approximately 30,000 independent carriers that we work with. But like I said, we've got a full list of offerings that we really look to our customers to be able to provide. It's kind of that one-stop solution, right? Whether it be drive-in or expedited or reefer, flatbed, we want to be able to provide these different modes to our customers so they can look to us to be that kind of one-stop solution for them at the end of the day. Right now, currently, NTG ranks as a top 15 brokerage written by Transport Topics, and it's something that we're looking to build on every day to be in that top 5 very soon.
Gotcha. Okay. Very interesting. And you guys definitely have a large footprint, it sounds like. So you mentioned the 30,000 independent carriers that you work with, right? And I think you were mentioning as well, throughout your career, you've worked with the carrier relationship side of things. So I'm curious, maybe can you enlighten us a little bit into, what's the difference between like NTG and then the independent carrier? How does that relationship work, and what does that mean for like a shipper?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, so when you think about a shipper, right, you've got roughly 18,000 brokers to choose from, right? Some of the smallest, shops out there to some of the publicly traded companies, right? So you have a choice of who you want to work with every single day. Now, if I'm a, shipper, I'm a customer, the last thing I want to really worry about is transportation or that transportation cost, right? Your core function is, producing beverages or producing plastic or whatever it might be, but transportation is a necessity to be able to do on a day-to-day basis, right? And so the last thing you want to be able to do is juggle 30,000 carriers in your network and still try to really focus on your core competence, right? And so some of the things that we do is really focus on building those relationships with those carriers that might not be able to get into every single customer base. One of the things that I really like to focus on is some of those smaller network carriers that can really build with you, right? So when you think about the carrier landscape out there, 90% of fleets are under 6 trucks, right? So a very long tail, very fragmented industry in general, right? But some of the things that I really like to build on are those trucking units that have 5, 10, 15 units. And what I really like to be able to do is not only build that partnership and relationship with them, but grow them as well too. Just like any company, they want to grow their fleet, right? And so I think one of the most powerful things you can do is look at a company with maybe 5 power units and be able to get into some mid-sized and large customers that they would never be able to get into and start to build off that with them and help them grow their network. There's nothing better to me, Kevin, at the end of the day, when a carrier comes back to me and says, hey, listen, Drew, we started with 5 trucks this year. With what NTG's been able to provide us, we were able to go to 10 trucks. Right. And so those are some of the things that we're really working on, is being on a focus on the specific carriers that we really want to grow with our network as we grow ourselves too.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, and that's a great explanation too of the difference and then the relationship in all the different ways. And it sounds like, you guys really want to, and you personally are really passionate about working with these different stakeholders in the process and ensuring that everybody, is getting beneficial out of it, and being able to grow to smaller guys like that too is a good thing, because I'm sure that the shippers, or myself, working in the warehouse throughout my career is, we want that reliability, having someone that knows your stuff and, knows the routes and things like that is always a plus. So being able to to grow those as well is definitely a benefit. So I'm curious, with you guys, you mentioned there's so many brokerages out there, and you guys are in the top 15. So what really differentiates you guys from the other brokerages? How did you get into the top 15?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question. I think, just one thing to your last point too, right?
Sure.
How you treat these carriers too, right? Kevin, right? We talk about all the things that go on in this, transportation industry. And I think sometimes, from the brokerage landscape, being behind a computer and things like that, the toughest thing to do in this industry is driving a truck, right? And so I think to your question about what, differentiates us from our competitors that are out there is being able to have that large carrier network that really does trust us, right, on that day-to-day basis, right? If you talk to any driver out there, the one thing they want to do the most is drive, right? The last thing they want to deal with is the paperwork and the processes and always constantly looking for loads, right? And so the biggest thing that we want to keep our drivers doing is doing what they love, right? They love getting in that truck. They love driving. They love, being able to get product from product, in situations that we went through over the last year. You think about COVID and how everything shut down and how we're in this pandemic. Yeah. The reason why everyone was able to live the lives that they did in the United States was because of our truck drivers across the country, right? Yeah. They kept moving. They kept on going above and beyond. So I think, to your question, what differentiates us? Obviously, our large carrier network. Like I said, we're very specific on the carrier sizes and units that we want to work with. So I think that's, sets us above the rest. A big thing that we're putting on in this year and more to come on this is just this huge technology investment that we're making here to not only service our customers, but to really service our carriers as well, too, to help with the ease of all this technology that's coming in. And I think the biggest thing that, we do on the back end of all this is technology is great. And people talk about it all the time. But the willingness for us to build, dedicated support systems on the carrier and customer side around our customers and carriers to get those trusted partnerships is really something that I think that even leverages our technology more at the end of the day, that we've got skilled, experienced people really able to help our customers and carriers.
Yeah, that's all great stuff. And I do want to, take a second and just kind of shout out the truckers, because you had a great point in there that, going through this pandemic and all this stuff, the reason we were able to stay home and do these things because we were all ordering more stuff online is because of the truckers. So sometimes I think they may go unnoticed, as I'm sure you probably see as well. I'm sure you noticed them, of course, but other people as well. They're just in their houses, don't realize how much they're actually moving and getting things to your doorstep. So definitely respect to them as well. So the differentiation, is obvious that you guys are really out there, and even from what you said before with the carrier relationships that you're growing, you're interested in being different and being able to accommodate not only the customer but the carrier as well, which is a great thing. And you mentioned in there the pandemic. So, I'm curious, how are you guys able to kind of navigate through the pandemic, and what were some of the impacts that the trucking industry saw, and how were you able to react and be proactive and help to kind of, I guess, reduce some of the issues that may have arisen?
We'll be back after a quick break.
You hear a lot about supply chains these days, because if the past couple years have taught us anything, it's that an efficient, well-managed supply chain is absolutely critical to keeping businesses successful and consumers happy. I'm Will Haywood, and I host a podcast called All Business, No Boundaries, where we talk about supply chains, how they work, what happens when they don't, and the innovations that are redefining what's possible in the world of logistics. Join me for insightful interviews with thought leaders and industry experts. We discuss how optimizing supply chains can break down the barriers that are holding businesses back. That's All Business, No Boundaries by DHL Supply Chain. Listen and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
Yeah, no, great question, Kevin. And I'd be lying to you if I had a great answer, right? I've seen, weather events, I've seen capacity issues, I've seen driver issues. Those are things that have come up over the last 30, 40, 50 years in this industry, right? And will continue to come up. I think the one thing that nobody saw coming up was a COVID pandemic that we went through, right? Yeah. And how vulnerable all of our supply chains across not only the U.S., but even global were impacted, right? And we're still catching up from that standpoint, right? I'm sure a lot of the conversations you've had around, some of the warehouse impact, that was largely affected, right? And we're still not up to where we need to be from those levels of where we were prior to COVID.
Right.
But I think in general, right, when you think about how this pandemic's really impacted, the trucking landscape, it's really changed a lot of different ways. One of the biggest things I talked about the other day with somebody was just the long haul driver, how supply chains look so much differently now with this huge surge in e-commerce, right? This huge surge of now everybody ordering everything offline, right? It used to be one of those things where maybe it was big ticket items or maybe it was something important. Now we're ordering a bag of Skittles online, right? And so it's changed the whole landscape of how we look at things, not only from a full truckload perspective, an LTL perspective, a final mile perspective, what you're seeing from a warehouse perspective, everything from the top bottom needed to be changed and need to be looked at in a different life, right? And so I think it's one of those things where if you had a plan for something like this, I don't know how you did, right? And even in the first couple months of the COVID, we saw these, big surges. We saw this, tail off. Nobody really knew where this was going to go next, right? And I think it's similar to when we turn this economy back on and people get back to a little bit normal life. Is this the new norm, right? Is everybody going to always continuously order offline, or do we see people going back to more of a brick and mortar style, right? And so I think it's going to be one of those things that obviously I think you have to have good partners. I think it's one thing that, you probably realized over the last year from all those different aspects I mentioned, where your link in your chain was broken, right? And so I think it helped us understand that as well too, of where we needed to get better in certain areas and be able to provide those solutions long term for our customers.
Yeah, interesting, and definitely, far from still being totally back to normal, as you mentioned, and it'd be interesting to see how things stick, especially with consumer behavior. Whether we're still going to be ordering just a bag of Skittles online, or are we going to get out of the house? I don't know. We'll see. But the other thing I'm curious, during that time, because I know prior to the pandemic, you kept hearing there's driver shortages, need more drivers. Did that stand true through the pandemic, or maybe was there more people interested in driving because it was more of like a quarantine type of job, or how is that kind of played out?
Yeah, no, I think great question on your part too. So I think it's one of those things, I've been in the industry now 15 years. I think every year I've heard the driver shortage, right? Exactly. And don't get me wrong, there is a shortage in the industry. Yeah. I've also heard the driver age every year for the last 15 years, but that driver age has stayed the same, right? Roughly around that 55 years old, right? Yeah. And so I think about when you think about the drivers coming in and out of the market, a lot of it had to do with how we were looking as an economy as well too, right? You go back to saying it's the largest occupation in America with over 3.5 million drivers out there. Well, you think about that occupation and you think about unemployment and you think about some of the things that have happened. That's one of those things where some of these guys on their end, did they take those stimulus checks, right? I had one driver tell me, hey, Drew, listen, I roughly make around $50,000 a year. I can sit at home on the couch for $45,000 a year, right? Yeah. And some of those people took the ability to do that. At the same time, though, too, like we've seen in any supply and demand issue, when the demand is outweighing the supply, that's going to chase rates up, right? And as many of them told me, hey, as easy as it might be to stay at home or take a little bit of time off or be able to get, some unemployment or a stimulus check or whatever it might be, when you see rates go the way that they did at certain points, that's when a lot of the drivers hop back in that truck because it was a great opportunity for them to make a lot of money as well too, right? And so I think it's one of those things of, being able to balance that. But I think it's one of those things where we look at this market, as we go forward, right? And you talk about this next generation coming up, right? I don't hear a lot of this new generation screaming to be a truck driver. So to your point, do we go more and more into this shortage? It's something to be TBD, but it's one of those things that I say as well too. We're having a lot more difficult getting younger people into those seats as we go forward.
Yeah, definitely. And I think some interesting points there, and I certainly see the same issues on the warehouse side too, as well. We had trouble getting labor because, as you said, I can sit at home and make just about the same, or in some cases maybe more. So, I'm curious on the side of the younger drivers. Obviously that's an issue, and I deal with some college students, supply chain majors. They're interested in transportation, logistics, but, obviously not to be a truck driver, right? So how do we get these younger people interested in truck driving as a career?
Yeah, no, it's something I talked about with a lot of people too, and I think it's really the gaps from some regulations that we have here as well too, right? You put somebody in a very predicament situation when they graduate high school. What do you do for those few years if you cannot get your CDL, right? And so I think we've got to be able to look at some of the regulations that are out there to help some of our younger people that are trying to get into the workforce. I think, like I said too, right? You think about all the drivers that are on the road today. We're not pushing away people from coming there, but people are ready to go, and we're telling them to wait a few years before they can actually get their CDL, right? And so those are some of the things that we've got to look at, I think, from a regulation standpoint to help with that. But I think it comes back to, the training and driving schools and the recruitment and how we go about that. And I think the biggest thing, too, is the pay for these drivers and these people that are doing this on a day-to-day basis, right? Like I said, there's a lot of jobs in transportation. You just said some of them, doing different jobs behind the scenes. The hardest job, though, is being that driver, right? And so those are things that we got to be able to look to reward and be able to help them out more and more as we struggle to find more and more of these drivers as we go forward from the younger generation.
Interesting. Yeah. And it's definitely a good point there about the CDL as well. And, we probably lose some people in that gap because they kind of, maybe they find something else in between. They're interested, but they find interest in something else. So it would be interesting to see how we can kind of combat that. And I think you definitely need to bring some awareness around that. So, also I'm curious, you mentioned the supply and demand. So with like the increase in shipping because more people are ordering and things of that nature, would you say it's like a opportune time, or has the past year been an opportune time? You mentioned the independent carriers. Has it been an opportune time to start an independent carrier business for some people? Yeah,
and this is where it troubles people sometimes, right? It's just like any market in general, right? Once you see it go, that's when people want to jump in, right? And once it's gone, did you jump in too late, right? Or did you miss the boat a little bit, right? Yeah. And so I'm a big believer in the years of, looking at the supply and demand just in general, right? Obviously the demand coming in and supply aside from the carriers that we are looking at as well too. The one thing that I've seen over the years over and over is the minute that we started getting these rates, guess what the big trucking companies do, especially the publicly traded ones? They go order a bunch more new tractors and trailers, right? The problem though with our market and how it works, it's very similar to some of these longer processes industries as well too. You order that truck today, right? It might not be on the road for 8 months for manufacturing things that happen, especially with COVID as well too. Think about the parts and everything that goes into it. Now you're maybe looking at an 8 to 10 month delay before that truck actually hits that road, right? And all along too, you got to worry about getting a driver into that truck, right? But as that goes through, right, and you saw these rates very high, these trucking companies, right when they see it, rush to get as many trucks as they can. But right as they do that, we go back into that next cycle because now these trucking units are coming slowly in the market, right? So I've always told people over the years, this industry is not a light switch, right? Everybody wants to flick it real quick of, supplies in the market, demands in the market. It's more of a faucet, right? Where it slowly comes in and out of the market, but it's always doing it year to year, right? And so I've told people over the next, 6 months, do I see supply coming back in the market? Absolutely, I do. We saw the highest Class A truck orders that we've ever seen in the last 6 years, right? So it's a matter of time before these actual trucks hit the road. At the same time, though, too, they're not all going to hit the road at once, right? And so when I tell people supply will come back in the market at the end of the year, early next year, I'm going to be wrong on the month or date, right? But when you think about it as a life cycle, we go through these cycles every couple of years, and it will continue to happen as much as one supply comes into the market compared to the other coming out.
Yeah, it's very interesting insight there on the cycle. I never, actually realized all of that and how it kind of goes around and around and what the impact is, and how the bigger guys are like, as you said, will put in a large order for more trailers because the rates go up. So very, very interesting insight there as well. So I'm curious now, we talked about during the pandemic, we talked about impacts of the pandemic, and hopefully, I think we're all hoping that we are coming to I guess we'll probably never come to a full close, but we're coming to post-pandemic life, whatever that may actually look like. It seems like we're on the way with vaccines rolling out and all those things, getting back to normalcy a little bit. So with that being said, what trends do you see happening this year, probably rolling into next year within the trucking industry, and what do you think it looks like post-pandemic?
Yeah, I think the one thing that you'll see from a lot of people is just appreciation for carriers in general, right? How they went above and beyond. So I think that's something that we should all look at, whether you be a broker, a shipper, or just somebody that sits on their couch, right? You've got to look to the appreciation of what our carriers did. I think from a investment standpoint, Kev, I think you're going to see a lot of people pushing for more technology, more data, more information to make more sound decisions while these things happen. And I think the biggest thing too, as well, how you look at some of your partnerships and your relationships, right? A lot of customers got burned when the going got tough, right? And to your point, were you a key customer? Were you a key partner during some of that? But I think you'll see a lot more people really hone in on fewer relationships that are more strategic, and then instead of spreading yourself out thin to everybody out there. But I'm already seeing that, through the customer cycle as well too. As there's more technology, as there's more information, things can be integrated a lot quicker, right? And so you think about, these lifelong cycles from the RFP process that were usually once a year, annual, very, very manually done. Well, now technology is coming in for a lot of these shippers where instead of doing once a year, maybe they do it once a month. Maybe they do it once a quarter. Maybe they do it when the rates are going one way or the other to help their unit at the end of the day. But I think the biggest thing that you'll see is people being a little bit smarter and a little bit more proactive to get ahead of some of these things that come up. Now, do I think it's going to be another COVID pandemic that hits them? No. But it goes back to some of the smaller issues we talk about with supply and demand, where they can be more ready for these as they look through some of the technology and data that they're receiving on a day-to-day basis. So I think you're going to see a lot more emphasis behind companies spending on these type of not only products, but people as well, too, to really help make strategic decisions at a high level.
Interesting. Yeah. Interesting thoughts there. And it will be interesting to see how it goes. But I think, like you said, the technology, I've certainly seen it in a lot of other cases as well, where the pandemic has kind of pushed companies to adapt technology in a lot of different ways just to keep up with demand, but also because of certain restrictions now, social distancing and all those different types of things as well. So it'll be interesting to see how the technology grows within the space and what else gets adopted and what companies adapt to as well. And I think you have a great point about the strategic partnerships. I mean, I think that's one thing, if you had a solid partnership with a company throughout the pandemic and, you guys are able to hold strong together, I'm sure that's going to, prove even stronger as we come out of this and as business maybe picks up, depending on what industry you're in, or it just continues to increase, even if you saw spikes already as well. So very interesting insights into the transportation industry from you, Drew. So really appreciate you coming on the show. How can people find out more information about NTG?
Yeah, we'd love you to come to our website, ntgfreight.com. We've got like I said, we've got a lot of things going on over here that we're trying to build on. We're ranked right now as that top 15 broker, and our goal is to be a top 5 broker. But we'd love you to check out our website, and any questions, please reach out and contact us.
All right, great. And we'll put all that information at thenewwarehouse.com as well. So, Drew, once again, thank you for your time and coming on the show.
You've been listening to the New Warehouse Podcast with Kevin Lawton. Subscribe and check us out online at thenewwarehouse.com.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If you want more content from the New Warehouse, check out our new video series called All Hands on LinkedIn. Just search for the New Warehouse on LinkedIn and follow along.